7 o'clock, 7:01. Welcome to our League of Women Voters monthly topic forum called Civic Buzz. Today we're going to talk about mis- and disinformation, particularly when it comes to elections. And our esteemed guest is Melanie Hazelip, and she is from outreach coordinator from Secretary Steve Simon's office, and is going to talk to us about election security and what we can do to make sure that we help to spread accurate information about election security. Okay, thanks, Melanie.
All right, thank you. I'm glad to be here, and this important topic that just continues, misinformation and disinformation that just continues to be an issue. My name is Melanie Hazelip. I'm the voter outreach coordinator for the Office of the Secretary of State. I've been here for 2 years, but have done voter engagement work since 2016. Mostly as a volunteer. I co-founded a little grassroots voting rights group in 2016, did some work with the League of Women Voters Minnesota for a little while, and just have been thrilled to be here at the big leagues working for Secretary Simon. But I always share my background because even if I weren't here working for Secretary Simon, I would still be somehow doing this work, even as a volunteer, because I just love it so much. We, like I said, continue to focus on misinformation and disinformation as a priority from our office. It doesn't seem to be going away. And with the advent of things like AI, it's just taking on new forms. So we will talk about all of that here, and then just some ways that you all, as partners to our office, the League is always just a fantastic partner to our office, can help us in this fight against misinformation and disinformation. So I am going to share my screen. And assume that you can all see that. If I see nodding head, okay, great. So to start, one thing that we always like to point out is that disinformation versus disagreement. And so we always make sure to start with disinformation is not disagreement. This quote from Secretary Simon: disinformation isn't disagreement on election policy or outcomes. It's information that seems designed and coordinated to attack or reduce confidence in our election systems. So having a disagreement about what you think the system should be or what you think the laws should be, or should not be, maybe you disagree with some of the laws that we have in place, that's not disinformation. But when you're having conversations that are spreading falsehoods about what the system is, that's disinformation. We know what the system is. And when you're saying something that's not true about the system, a popular one that we're hearing right now is that undocumented people are registering and voting in large numbers. That's simply not true. That's a disinformation versus disagreement. And one of the ways that we encourage you to think about things when you're having these conversations about disinformation or disagreements is try to think about who you're talking to. There's a difference between misinformed and uninformed. There are some people who, you know, we held, maybe some of you visited us at the state fair. We held our booth, our voter registration booth at the state fair, and there were some folks that would come to our booth. They didn't care what we had to say about their disinformation. They were going to believe what they believed, no matter what we said, no matter what facts we presented them with. You know, they were misinformed. But there were many folks that came that were simply uninformed. And when we would explain to them what the process actually is, they would walk away and say, thank you for explaining that to me. So be aware of who you're talking to. You know, there are certainly times where it's maybe not worth your time and energy to have the argument if you know that the folks aren't going to hear you. But then there are plenty of times where it is, depending on if they're uninformed versus misinformed. And then we really are encouraging people to take the lead when you're having these conversations. So really, instead of you know, reacting to what they are saying the system is, really take the lead in having the conversation and leading with the truth and talking about what the system is and leading with the truth. And to start, we always want people to get their information from trusted resources, trusted sources, and encouraging the folks that you're talking to do the same. If they say something, ask where they heard that, and kind of dig into where they're getting their misinformation from, and suggest that they go to local election officials or our office. We do suggest county officials or local election officials because sometimes they're more trusted for certain people at the local level than hearing from our office. Sometimes our office for some folks isn't the trusted resource. But if you're talking to your neighbor who's an election judge or your local county election official, that's also a great trusted resource. And then when you're having the conversations, to really try to have them with an open mind. Leading into that is, choosing your words wisely, having the conversations with an open mind. It was, I will admit, challenging at times out at the state fair booth, when you hear things that are just so grossly false, but to avoid the defensiveness and to be sure that you're approaching it with, open body language and open tone of voice, and just assume positive intent. Really, what it all comes down to is we all do want the same thing. We all do want our system to be safe and secure. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, no matter what you might believe, we all have that same commonality. And so really focusing on that and assume positive intent from the other person. And then really try to build a sense of team. So one thing that we focus heavily on here is that Minnesotans are proud voters. We are often number one in voter turnout. And if we're not number one, we're right at the top. Regardless of what team you're on, we can build a sense of team as, hey, we're all Minnesotans here. We all want high voter turnout. We all want the system to be secure. So really try to build on that commonality. And that's, again, coming back to enhancing that community pride. There's a reason Minnesota is always at the top for voter turnout. It's because our system is so strong. And then just try to bring that positivity to the topic. It's very easy for conversations to get shut down just by tone of voice and just by a certain body language. And so, of course, our office has plenty of information resources to offer when it comes to finding the facts and making sure that you are leading with the truth, or if people are open to it, to direct them to our resources that we have available. We have our fact versus fiction page. This is found at mnvotes.gov. It's a living, breathing page that we add to whenever we need to about what the most frequent or common misconceptions are, mistruths, disinformation about our system. You can click on any fiction and then find out the truth behind it. It'll really walk you through what the actual truth is in our system. We also have a page dedicated to how our elections work, really walking you through every single step of the process. Our elections in Minnesota are incredibly transparent, and I'll talk in a little bit about exactly how members of the public can really observe every step of the way. And this website really does a nice job of walking you through all of that. We also have, video resources as well, that you can find either on our website or on our YouTube page. These are easy and great to share. And then going back to how transparent our process is from start to finish. So starting with the voting equipment before every election, voting equipment is certified by the federal government and from our office before the counties are allowed to use it. They're always secured and stored in very secure locations. And then they're tested. There's one piece of equipment tested in every county ahead of every single election. And they're called public accuracy tests because anybody from the public can go and watch these tests. You don't need to be, have a special invitation or be a member of the press. Anybody can attend these public accuracy tests, and they really just go through and test the machines to make sure that they work. It's maybe a little counterintuitive, but if you think it through, it's almost a good thing if it doesn't work right there, because then they're finding that out before the election and then they can fix the problem ahead of the election. But it's a great way before the election to really see exactly how the machines are run. During the administration of the election, you can be an election judge. This is such a great thing to suggest to somebody who is expressing mistrust in our system. We need 30,000 election judges for every statewide election. And I know many League of Women Voters serve as election judges. I'm sure most of you know that election judges are really your neighbors. They live in your neighborhood. So if you walk into your polling place, you probably recognize those faces. And if somebody is telling you something about the system that is false, or they don't trust the system, they think it's rigged, tell them to be an election judge. That gives them the opportunity to go behind the scenes themselves and watch how elections are administered at the most foundational grassroots level in their neighborhood. Not only that, we will pay them. We will pay them to go behind the scenes. You always have a right to get paid to serve as an election judge. So if you think there's, what was the hanky-panky was the word that I heard at the state fair. If you think there's hanky-panky going on in our elections, go be an election judge. Go get paid to be an election judge and find out for yourself. There are always an election judge from each of the major parties present for any of the sensitive tasks that must be conducted. So that's a good way to know that there's always party balance when they're administering elections at the local level with an election judge from each side. So there's always that accountability from each party watching the other party, but it's really a great opportunity to see how our elections are run. And then after the election, the post-election reviews. You can always attend a ballot board meeting after the election when they certify the elections. There's a certification process done by the ballot boards, and anybody can go and watch. They're usually terribly boring, but you're welcome to go and watch and see how it's done if you don't trust that the certification of elections is done with integrity. Something to note is that all 87 counties will do a hand count of a random precinct. It is quite literally, the precincts are quite literally picked by picking a piece of paper out of a giant bowl with all the precincts in it. So it's really just random. It's almost like bingo where you're picking it out of the bowl, just completely randomized. And then that county will conduct a hand count of that precinct to ensure that the hand count matches what the tabulator said. And that happens in all 87 counties. Again, you can go to the ballot board meetings and watch how this is done. So just from start to finish, from watching the machines be tested to taking part as an election judge to watching the post-election reviews, you really have the opportunity to participate and observe at every step of the way. We do have some social media graphics that talk about all of these things. This is our misinformation social media toolkit. You may be familiar with our regular social media toolkit. We also have our brand new Here We Vote digital toolkit, but these can be found on our website specific to some of the things that we just talked about and specific to misinformation and disinformation. And then, of course, a little conversation about AI and elections, because that's become a hot topic. It is a new way to enhance how misinformation and disinformation is spread. So an example that Secretary Simon always gives is many years ago, I believe it was in Milwaukee, there was a flyer, an actual paper flyer that was distributed in neighborhoods that said, if your last name starts with A through L, you vote on Tuesday. If your last name starts with M through Z, you vote on Wednesday. So they were intentionally trying to mess up voters' ability to participate in the election. That, of course, is misinformation. That is illegal now in state statute in Minnesota based on the new laws that we've passed. But also what he points out in that example is, now imagine that that's not a paper flyer that's being dropped into mailboxes. That's an AI video of the mayor of Milwaukee or of a popular sports figure from Wisconsin. So that's really what AI has done in our election system, is just sort of enhanced the way misinformation and disinformation is being shared. Minnesota has been on the cutting edge of combating AI. This is Secretary Simon speaking in front of Congress in DC, Washington, DC last year, because Minnesota has really been on the forefront, really making sure that we stay ahead of it. And the way we've done that is by passing some of the strongest laws in the country against deepfakes, against AI. So any video or audio or photo that is shared within 90 days of an election without the consent of the person depicted with the intent to spread disinformation. So, if it said, if your name starts with A through L, you vote on Tuesday, M through Z on Wednesday. If those three things are present in the sharing of the AI deepfake, then that is now explicitly outlined in Minnesota state statute as illegal. So we've really kind of set an example for the rest of the country on how to try to stay ahead of it. And then I have this a little bit out of order. I should have had this back a couple slides ago, but I just wanted to share that we do have a fact sheet, this flyer that you can share with folks about how to become an election judge, what it means to be an election judge, letting people know how to apply and who can apply. One thing that I just have to plug, even though it's a little bit unrelated to misinfo and disinfo, is that 16 and 17-year-olds can serve as election judge trainees. So they don't have the authority that an adult election judge has, but they get to serve right alongside the election judge and learn all of the things that the election judges do. They too have a right to get paid, and they too have a right to time off of school to serve. So it's the hook that we always use is you can skip school and get paid. It's a really good gig. The other thing I always note is that it looks fantastic on a resume for adults and for young people. But if you're a high school student and you put that you're an election judge on a college resume or a job resume, that really looks good. So we're just making a big plug. We're trying to pull in those young folks to the process as soon as we can, as early as we can. I will say my 18-year-old who's going down to Carleton, she served when she was 16 and 17, and one of the other competitive schools that she applied to, when they sent her acceptance letter, the admissions counselor wrote 3 things that stood out on her application, and being an election judge was one of those 3 things. So it really is a great opportunity for young people as well as adults. And then, here's the now what. Here's what do we hope that you'll do with all of this information. We have the toolkits. We have the ready-made messaging that you can find on our website to share in newsletters, emails, and social media. Really letting folks know the truth about our elections is very easy in Minnesota because our office provides messages that you can just copy and paste. And really, we try to make it easy with our outreach materials for you to be able to share the information. Posting things on bulletin boards, that election judge fact sheet, or any of the other fact sheets that we have a whole, 15 to 20 of them on our website that you can either download and print or order them directly from our office. We'll send them to you for free. Any place, any community event, any community space. So I'm always the block party coordinator for our national night out. I always put voting information on the table. Anything that doesn't have anything to do with the election or voting can still have nonpartisan voter information available. Everything from our office is always nonpartisan. So no matter what the event is or what the space is, that it's safe to share. And community spaces, make sure your libraries are posting things, and your community centers, any community spaces that you go to, make sure that they have our materials ready. And then, often overlooked and undervalued is talking with your friends and family, having the conversations that can be hard conversations, or the conversations that aren't hard, and just making sure that they're registered. Who your friends and family are, that the conversations are going to be a little bit easier and a little bit more challenging, but we call that relational organizing, and it really is powerful. You as league members are trusted voices in your communities, but you're also a trusted voice amongst your own social networks. So really sharing this information in your own personal social networks goes a long way as well. And then lastly, that's my email address. That's my cell phone number, because I just really want anybody to reach out if you're looking for materials or you have a question or an idea. I will say that a lot of the materials that we have, the resources that we have to share, come from ideas from community members, from partners like you who say, hey, I think our community could really use this resource. Can you create it? And if it's within our means, we will. So don't hesitate to use either one of those contact informations if you ever want to reach out. And I'll stop sharing there and save some time for any questions that you might have.
Ellen, did you want to ask your question, or would you rather I ask it? I'll do it. Okay, so in the chat, Ellen asks, what can I say to someone who says non-citizens are voting? besides that's not true?
Yeah, so because of automatic voter registration and driver's licenses for all being passed in Minnesota at the same time, this has become a huge topic of conversation. It was the main thing that we heard at the fair that people were concerned about. There's a couple different things to point out. So with automatic voter registration, you are not put in the pile to be registered to vote unless you've shown proof of citizenship. So the Department of Motor Vehicles employees, think about the last time you went to get your ID. There's that long list of approved documents that you have to show, and you have to show proof of United States citizenship before that Department of Motor Vehicles employee will process that registration as a voter registration. It's worth pointing out that this isn't new for that process isn't new for those workers. We have people who have lived in this country that are here on work visas. My neighbor, for example, is from Spain. He is allowed to drive in this country legally. He's here legally. He's allowed to drive. He's not allowed to vote. So, you know, the DMV knows how to process this exact type of thing. So really just making sure that folks know that you have to show proof of citizenship before you're registered to vote. The other question that then comes up from people who know how our process works a little bit, if you are an undocumented person and you have a driver's license from Minnesota, technically you could show up on election day and use that driver's license and register to vote. There's, you know, the driver's license doesn't say that you're not a citizen, so you could technically do that. Your vote would be counted. Once you vote, yes, a birth certificate or a passport would be those citizenship documentations. Once the election was over, and then when the county and our office starts processing all of those same day voter registrations, that voter would be found out, because the voter registrations are processed against 4 different databases. We cross-reference them against 4 different databases. So eventually, once those cross-references are done, that voter would be found out. And in all instances, we really emphasize that it's up to $5,000 in jail, $5,000, 10 years in jail, and or deportation. People are not risking it to cast a ballot when those are, you know, you're permanently deported from our country and you've given us your driver's license. Like, people aren't risking it with those penalties. And so we really, those are the ways that we try to make sure people understand how the process works. Oh, you were on mute. I see hands up. I don't mind just calling folks. I see Pamela Parker. Do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. I'm assuming that you get out into the rural areas and speak on this fairly often, and I'm just wondering how the response is out there, and what you see amongst the people that are manning the, you know, the election workers and things, and how that's working out, because I'm assuming that it may put some of them in uncomfortable positions. They're trying to do their job and, you know, work to do what the system needs, you know, to operate. And then their neighbors are maybe some of the ones that are particularly, you know, not believing in what's going on and that sort of thing. So I'm wondering what you're hearing from them, and just what you're seeing and hearing out there in the rural areas where there seems to be a stronger, you know, belief that there's some kind of a problem.
Yeah, it depends on where you go. We were in Red Wing yesterday. Secretary Simon will be in Granite Falls tomorrow. So absolutely, we're constantly traveling the state. The good news is we have partners all across the state. We have League of Women Voters chapters all across the state. We have other partners all across the state who are able to help us do this work. And then there are certain places where there are much more active, you know, election denier groups. And so it really just depends on where you're going in the state. We're just we're always in close communication with the counties and the county officials to make sure that they have the support that they need. And the good news is that so far in Minnesota, we really haven't had instances of, you know, threats or aggression against election workers. You know, you've seen some things in other states, maybe election workers fearing for their safety or having some really negative encounters. We really haven't had that here in Minnesota yet. We did put some laws into place in 2023 to stay ahead of it, again, to stay ahead of the game and put protections in place for our election workers. But so far, we're not really seeing that. So we're doing the best. We actually partner closely with the League of Women Voters Minnesota, with Michelle Woody and Sam Streakins, to make sure that in those areas where they do have a more active election denier constituency, that the league is also present there. And at those county meetings that we have that counter voice with the league. So that's kind of how we're trying to approach it. Jane P, I'll just keep asking. Yeah, go ahead,
Okay.
Jane P.
Okay, well, this question might be beyond the scope of this particular event, but what still puzzles me, and I probably should know the answer to this question, but how there can be news networks who just continue to spout lies about candidates, about elections, and so on and so forth. You know, I understand we have the First Amendment, but why aren't limitations to the First Amendment ever posed, you know, not taken against, you know, some of these places where these lies come from? I have relatives who will respond to postings that I put on Facebook, and I can tell exactly where it came from, you know, so I don't know, it just puzzles me that the First Amendment covers this. And I wonder if you have any response to that.
One thing that I do recall you might recall a couple years ago when Fox News, there was a lawsuit against Fox News for this type of thing. And the way they got around it was by claiming that they're not a news source. I forget what the terminology was that they used, but it was something to the effect of, we're not a news outlet, we're an entertainment outlet, or whatever, however that, like, that was their loophole. That's how they got around it. And so, you know, I don't know much more than that, but I think that for that particular network, you know, there's other smaller networks as well, but for that particular network, that's how they managed to get around that.
Okay.
But, and then of course, you know, unfortunately, there's still how many viewers out there that view it as a news source. And so,
Yeah.
you know, you'd think maybe they would have shot themselves in the foot there when they said that, but they didn't seem to. They still have plenty of viewers. So
Okay. Thank you.
yeah. Another Jane Lansing has had her hand up.
Yes, thank you. You know, your response to Ellen on the non-citizens was really good. It felt very robust. So how robust are other states' laws versus Minnesota? Because you talked about comparing the 4 databases and, you know, the DMV, and I thought, oh, I can defend that. But I mean, can Louisiana defend that? So I actually have 2 questions. So that's my first question. So how are Minnesota processes versus the other states' processes?
I have no idea how the other states' processes are. So I'm not in election administration. And so I don't, you know, I know a bit about our own states. But also I know, I mean, I could just at a surface level, I understand that not all states have automatic voter registration. Not all states have driver's licenses for all. So even just those 2 points that we just passed, not all states have either one of those. So, you know, they all have very different processes. They all have, some don't have online voter registration. Some have cutoffs 3 weeks before the election, where if you don't register by 3 weeks prior to the election, you're out of luck. You don't have same day registration. So they're all so different. I remember asking, and I don't remember how many, there weren't many, if any, states also have automatic voter registration and driver's licenses for all. But it was not many. So they're really just quite different.
And those things are the more progressive things that Minnesota does, but the robustness of the process, you know, besides those progressive things, You know, I think that that's more where I think people will, you know, kind of will challenge the system. And I think our system feels quite robust, but I think Minnesota, as you said, I think we're a leader in that.
Yeah, and I know that there is, I'm blanking on what it's called right now. It's an acronym. I know there is an interstate compact where all of the states communicate with each other. So if I move to Wisconsin, the states are communicating to each other about where people are living and who's moved and trying to keep voter registrations updated that way. And then I can also say, I know that we have something called the National Associations for Secretaries of State. And so they're twice a year, they meet formally, and then they're constantly meeting formally in person, and then they're constantly meeting, you know, virtually or by phone. So I know that the states are communicating with each other in a variety of different ways, but it's up to each state to determine how they actually administer their elections. And I just don't know how it's done in each state.
Okay, then I'll ask my second question, Jan, if you don't mind. So have you ever had like an election denier volunteer to become an election judge and they're problematic in the process? I'm this more of a curiosity because I know some people who are election deniers and I want to tell them, go be an election judge. And I'm just wondering if they would be really, really problematic in, you know, in the team.
Not that I've heard of. And you are bound by state statute to follow certain laws and regulations as an election judge. You know, it's the things that they have to do are very clearly outlined in state statute. And if you don't get to have that job. So I don't know. I haven't heard of anything specifically, but I do know, you know, we have talked about how if there were a case like that, you know, if you're not following the law, then the county will ask you to leave. I see Janet has her hand up now.
My question kind of relates back to other states. Don't all states now have a paper trail? I mean, is that one thing that you could say for sure that would help people?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm not sure. I know Minnesota's adamant that we will always keep a paper trail, but I don't know if all states do. Judy, do you have the answer? I'm not sure if Judy has the answer to that. She came on right away.
I can't answer that all states do, but you know, someplace like the Brennan Center might have that information. My understanding is after the debacle in 2000 in Florida, many states really improved their systems. But the Brennan Center would be a good place to go for that information. The other thing, Jane, on your question about election judges, all election judges, and I think you probably do it also if you work at the election night project with the league with Minneapolis Board of Elections, you take an oath. You raise your hand and you take an oath saying, I'm going to uphold the laws. And in fact, it's on the front of our election judge book. So, you know, and if you violate that law, if you violate that oath, then as Melanie said, the election judge will ask you to leave, but you do take an oath. So you assume people are people of honor who are doing that.
Yes, and election night the election night judges, we all take an oath. That exact oath.
So Melanie, there's another question in the chat from Lisa Norling, and she says, how is the law against election dis and misinformation being enforced? The actions are illegal, but how can we be sure that most or all are caught before the election?
So that's the problem. You can't always, right? I mean, as much as we haven't really encountered it yet here in Minnesota. It's a brand new law and it's a brand new phenomenon. But there are certainly instances of things coming out of bot farms in Russia, you know, like you're not going to track that down. But there are, I think if I recall correctly, there was during the presidential primary, there was an AI of Joe Biden in, I think it was New Hampshire. And the media and the Secretary of State's office and the law enforcement all came together and acted very swiftly, and they did find that person out, if I recall correctly. So it's really imperative for law enforcement and our office to work together. But, you know, the truth is, it's not always going to be possible. Just like anything, just like any other law, you know, you can't, it's not always possible.
Just to follow up on that, I'm the one who asked the question. Are there any, when the law was passed, was it funded at all? I mean, are there additional people in the Secretary of State office who are surveilling and, you know, checking online and, you know, looking for these things? Or is it something that people have to, if they think there's a scam, they have to report it? Or is law enforcement looking after it? You know, Keith Ellison's office, or?
So we don't have additional resources specific to this law, but what I can tell you is we have an amazing election security team here. We have a specific cyber navigation team that has several members on it. They're just, anytime I'm in a room with them, I'm in awe at how smart they are and amazing they are. And then they are always working not only with our Minnesota law enforcement, but also always in communication with federal agencies as well. And so there's and not only in communication and keeping each other informed, but even running what they call tabletop exercises every, I don't know if they do them quarterly, but they do them frequently. And they do them in conjunction with all of the counties that are able to participate, and then all of the various law enforcement agencies. And they just run through all these different scenarios. So let's say this happens on election day. Who do we call first? What's the first order that we have to take care of? So it's something that not only our team and the state officials, but also the federal officials are just constantly working on. And the thing that I heard our cybersecurity navigator, he used to be in the military. He said, the good news is, yeah, there are bad guys out there doing AI, but we're the good guys. We've got plenty of good guys fighting against AI. So you hear about the bad guys or the potential bad things that could happen. And you don't always hear about the amazing people like our cybersecurity team who's just constantly working on this issue. So we do have a really great group of folks that are constantly monitoring the situation.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. I see Sue has her hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering, with the large breadth of election law changes that were passed last year, if you see dis or misinformation disproportionately to any specific change, say the felon voting reenactment. I'm just wondering if you're seeing specific items targeted.
Automatic voter registration for sure right now. That's the one that we're really hearing the most about. There was, if you remember hearing about different lawsuits against Restore the Vote with the felony reenfranchisement, those lawsuits, their intention was to sow mistrust. You know, there was, I think nobody expected those lawsuits would go anywhere. But the point was, and it worked. I even talked to some league members who said, you know, I know this lawsuit is out there. I'm afraid to do outreach in this area until we know that this lawsuit's going to be settled. So it was, their intention was to sow mistrust, and they did that. And so Secretary Simon and Keith Ellison came out strongly with joint statements. They gave a joint press release on that subject. But I would say that kind of came and went. And now what we're really hearing is automatic voter registration and driver's licenses for all.
Melanie, do you have I assume that you have on your website and in your information that's available, something about that, like a one-pager or something that we could share as league or just as people?
Yeah, we
about...
have, for automatic voter registration, we have a specific website that also includes a link to a flow chart. And the flow chart's really handy because that you get to walk through every single step of the process, what happens behind the scenes of how those driver's licenses are processed. And the thing that we always say is it's called automatic voter registration, but that's really a misnomer. It's automatic for you, the voter, you're automatically registered, but the behind the scenes process is far from automatic. And it actually, something that people don't consider is that it actually really does make our system more secure because we're able to pull those registrations in ahead of time earlier. You know, the registrations aren't all coming through like right before the election. They're coming through all throughout the year. So we're able to process them in good time and have more time to pull people into the systems and make sure that they're actually eligible to be registered before election day.
Great. I'm not seeing any more questions. Are there any more questions for Melanie? Oh, I do see a couple hands coming up. At least it says here there are hands. Do you see them?
Oh, I think they're clapping, which
Oh,
I appreciate.
okay.
Lisa, this is Judy.
Yeah.
I put a report from the Brennan Center in chat if anybody's interested about use of paper ballots in the 2024 election. So hopefully that would address the questions that people had on that topic.
Okay. And that is a raised hand, Jan? Or did you change mine, Jan?
I'm going to put in the chat also the automatic voter registration website, which has the link to that flow chart.
Great.
I
Great.
put something in
Jan,
the
you're on
chat.
mute.
Oops. I think I had
No,
hand
she's
raised.
good.
They talked about the ERIC database. Is that still a
That's-
major database? And
yes.
how many,
Yes.
and how many, I mean, that's not all the states. It's just part of the states. Is that right?
Yeah, you can opt into ERIC. There was an attack against ERIC where they tried to sort of blanking on the word because it's 7:43 in the first week of school, so my brain's going to mush. But there were, again, similar to Restore the Vote, where they were trying to sow mistrust. You know, there were some attacks against ERIC where bad agents were trying to sow mistrust against ERIC being a bad organization. There are, I don't recall how many states, but more states than not are in ERIC. And ERIC, I forget what it stands for, but it's that system where the states are communicating with each other about who's on their voter rolls, who has moved to what state. That's what ERIC is, and it's been extremely helpful for states to be able to keep their voter rolls current.
Sheila, were you trying to ask about the databases? I see she tried to jump in, and in the
Yes.
chat she says,
Yes, I wanted to know, you mentioned the 4 databases that are cross-referenced to verify citizenship for voting. What are those 4 databases?
Yeah, so real quick, I'll tell you that there are 30 states currently in ERIC. I was able to find that with a quick Google
good.
search. It is the Social Security Administration and the Department of Health, and I don't recall the other 2 right now. I can.
driver
goodness.
services,
Yep. I can email that. I'm forgetting what the 4th one is now, so I can email you that if you're curious. And that you'd also be able to find that on one of those election facts web pages that I showed earlier in the slide deck too.
I'll just check there, so you don't
Okay.
have to do another step.
Just a note, does everybody know you can copy the chat, because we're getting a lot of information in the chat, and you can copy it so that you have all that information and it doesn't just disappear when we adjourn.
Melanie, you mentioned earlier about party balance at poll, among poll workers. Is that ever a problem? Do you ever struggle?
Yeah, for sure. And it goes, exactly how you think it would go in Minneapolis. They don't struggle for DFL election judges, and in rural Minnesota, they don't struggle for GOP election judges. You're allowed to serve in other counties. So if you live in Minneapolis and they have, they usually have their fill of election judges, but you can tell them that you're willing to travel, that you're willing to serve elsewhere. And so that's often how they find that party balance. And then counties also, each party provides a list to the counties about who on their party, like when they have caucuses, who's willing to sign up to be an election judge. So the counties will, or parties will provide a list to the counties, and that's where they can start to try to make sure that they achieve that balance. So it can be a struggle, but it's always done. They always find a way to do it in the end. Two folks right now. Ellen, go ahead.
I know that I'm going to be challenged, so that's why I'm so fussy about this. But I was an election judge, and we did same-day voter registration. And, you know, you can't cross-reference anything when you're doing same-day registration. And I don't remember that we had to ask anybody for a birth certificate. We might have had to ask them for a driver's license. I don't remember that. But my question is really, if people say that non-citizens are voting, do we really require a birth certificate? I mean, what kind of proof can I say they had to show in order to be able to vote?
Yeah, so that goes back to a couple things that I mentioned earlier. So a person could use their driver's license, an undocumented person could use their driver's license and go register to vote same day and cast their ballot that day on election day. They could do that. There's nothing on that driver's license that shows that they're a non-citizen. And like you point out, at your polling place, you're not showing a birth certificate. However, again, in the end, that person is found, especially when they've given us their driver's license, which you need to show a Minnesota ID in order to be registered. Or somebody can vouch for you, which we can talk about that too if you want. But if you come to register same day and you show your Minnesota ID, we have your information. And so even though your ballot will be cast in that moment, you will be found. And the statistic that I can give you, there was a long-term study done by a St. Thomas professor. I don't recall how many election cycles it covered, but it covered 13 million votes cast. Out of 13 million votes, only 3 undocumented people had voted. So does it happen? Yes, but 3 out of 13 million, I don't know what points per, my husband's a math whiz. He could tell me exactly what percentage that is. A very, 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 very tiny small percentage. So eventually, if that person tries to register same day in the polling place, they will be found out. And something that we're trying to encourage election judges, or even just you doing a voter registration drive. If you register somebody to vote at a registration drive, they've shown you your driver's license. We're encouraging in those situations, and for election judges on election day, to really emphasize eligibility. Really emphasize that you have to be a United States citizen. You have to be a resident of Minnesota, 18 years or older. You have that oath that you swear as a voter under perjury of law, penalty of perjury of law. And if you lie under oath, if you sign that oath and you're not a citizen, you will be fined $5,000, 10 years in jail, and or deportation. So it really is, the vote will be cast, but in the end, you're found out and you're deported.
Thank you. That's what I needed to know.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can sometimes be helpful for people to hear, out of 13 million people, only 3 in Minnesota were cast by undocumented folks. And it's also worth pointing out that in the work that I do, I hear the concern equally as loud and equally as frequently from people who are living in those communities where their friends and families and neighbors are undocumented, and they're scared that their friends and families and neighbors are going to be accidentally registered to vote, and they're going to get in trouble and they're going to get deported. We hear so loudly the people who are worried about voter fraud, but quietly in the work that I do, I hear just as equally the folks who are in those communities who are worried that their members are going to be registered and they're going to get in trouble, because that's more the reality of it. Is people aren't risking it. They're not risking one vote for deportation, but they do worry that they will get caught up in a system that they're going to then get in trouble for. Glenna. Yeah, I see Glenna.
Hi, I don't know if you can answer this, but I have been interested in being an election judge, and then I see the hours they work, and there's no way I can do that. And I can't get anywhere that early in the morning. Is there such a thing as a part-time election judge?
I think that some counties do. Yeah. I've heard that some counties may provide that option. I know for 16 and 17-year-olds, they definitely have that option. But it's a question, the counties do all the hiring and training. So it would be a question for your county.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Glenna, I'm like you. I'm not a morning person and I work a half shift. I start working at 2 and go to the closing. And that's in Minneapolis.
I did
Okay,
this.
so Minneapolis does allow, yeah, okay. So if you're in
Okay.
Minneapolis, that sounds like an option.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It is a long day. 7, polls open at 7, they close at 8. You're there before that, you're there after that. It is a long day.
How do
I
you
know how
get
they
to
do it.
do a half shift? Do you request that?
Judy, yeah.
Yeah, what they do is when you take the training and then when they send out a note to you about your interests, like where you're willing to go, you mark in there that you're interested in doing a half shift only. Because there's some people who only want to work like the early morning people, thank heavens for them. But they only want to do a half a day, so it works out well. And the other thing is I think the people in the polling places where I work that work all day, I always volunteer to stay and let them go home because a lot of times you don't need everybody. And I think they appreciate that because you can tell they're very, very tired at the end of the day.
Golden Valley has half shifts too.
Golden Valley does too. Good to know.
Minnetonka does as well. I wanted to note that in the newspaper just this week, the statistic that from 2018, 2020, 2022, more than 8.4 million votes were cast. Of that 8.4 million, only 45 convictions for either illegal voting or registration during that period, which is, I have to look at this number and figure it out, 10, 100,000, 56 10,000ths of 1%.
Yeah, and I imagine that's not just undocumented folks registering to vote, but just other registrations.
A lot of them, I think, were probably people who had served time and didn't realize that they couldn't vote once they were out of prison. Of course, we won't. And that was ignorance, not
yeah. Or
malice.
somebody moved and they didn't update the registration or whatever. There's all kinds of circumstances of that too. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that statistic because it's kind of bananas actually how infrequently it happens in the grand scheme of things when, you hear, that elections should have gone another way. And you think about how many tens of thousands of votes cast that would have caused, that they would have had to cause that versus how many are actually cast fraudulently. It's just such a small number.
And so many different ways it could be wrong. And still there were 45 people out of 8 million or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also good to know that there's active prosecution going on. I mean, that it's an active process to find people so that it makes it, again, rigorous.
So I actually just learned this yesterday. Secretary Simon, I've seen him give his presentations a million times by now, and I still always learn something from him. Apparently, an accusation of something illegal against election laws is either the one or one of just very, very few, but I think it was the one offense in Minnesota that law enforcement must investigate. There are some offenses that somebody will say, oh, this happened and you need to go check it out. And law enforcement can choose. Recording that's an issue. But an accusation against election laws that the law enforcement must investigate. So it is taken quite seriously.
Okay, well, I think that we need to let Melanie go. She's gone longer than she was asked to. But
I
really
love that there were so many
'cause,
questions and so much engagement. That's always so much more fun for me. So thank you all for the great questions and the work that you do. My work at the League of Women Voters with Michelle, I have such a soft spot for League members. So thank you all for your great partnership.
Thank you so much.
Have a good rest of your night.
Thanks. Yep. So the rest of you, I did actually have we had asked her to be here for half an hour, and I did have a presentation of my own about other kinds of election mis and disinformation. Obviously, we don't have time for that now, but I will include my slide deck along with hers in the study guide, which should be coming out tomorrow, perhaps Saturday. But and that has a lot of information about, like I said, other kinds of misinformation and disinformation, political, or even just weird viral things that you see and go, could that be true? With a bunch of resources, including from the League of Women Voters US and the League of Women Voters Minnesota, that has some fact checking and other resources for you to find out what the real information is, and also some advice on how and when to engage or not when you see something, say, on Facebook or whatever other social media you are, or as one of the websites that I said, or just a conversation with your crazy uncle, and how to find the real information and how to engage in a way that, of course, you're not going to call them that, that helps people listen, and a way for you to be a better listener, so that when you do engage over these kind of controversial topics, you can actually have a conversation and get somewhere toward the truth, because obviously things are very polarized right now. So I will include all of that information, and hopefully we can, I will publish the study guide, not just to the units, but to all members, so that everyone can have those resources. So that is what we've got for today, since it is now time. I want to thank you all for participating in our Civic Buzz, and also just for being a member of the League and helping us strengthen our democracy. It's such an important thing right now. We always are saying that, but it does kind of feel every election like it's getting more and more high stakes. So we appreciate all of you and the work that you do. And we will see you next time. Thank you.
We thank you too. We thank you too.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.